we don't nearly value what healthy, intact forests do for us and the life-sustaining resources that they provide to us. We occupy this incredibly potent space of destroyers and creators, and it's all part of the mix. But if we're simply destroying, that we're just undermining that which sustains us. Connecting to other men was uncomfortable in many ways. I played sports a lot, so that allowed some engagement, but not at the depth that you guys bring forth in this world. Having a space and having those creative containers that hold vulnerability and love and sadness and fear and just the uncomfortability, and to be seen by other men. It's not so much that's what I was going into to experience, but that's what has emerged for me in getting to drop in with Sacred Sons.
Men, the world is asking for you to stand up, to show up, to move forward in a new way. The pathway of embodied leadership is here, and where we're going, we go together. Using time-tested masculine frameworks for modern men who are ready to take ownership of their life. Guided by directions, elements, growth edge challenges, weekly rituals, and the 7 pillars of embodiment. Train directly with the leaders of Sacred Sons at Prime Leadership. Grow alongside your brothers in Leadership Training 1, or grow at your own pace with the Embodied Masculine course. Because together, we are more. Join this global movement today. Grand Rising Sacred Sons, Adam Jackson here with another episode of the Sacred Sons podcast. Brothers and sisters, as we deepen into the darkness, as we deepen into this holy day season, we're also entering a time of the unknown. There's a lot of talk, there's a lot of essence in the air of what is to come. And in that way, I truly feel like as a global society, we are in an unknown space. And this is why we train. This is why we sit in ceremony. This is why we go into those uncomfortable spaces so that we can prepare for the unknown. And so what does it look like for us to be in collaboration with nature? No matter what it is we're working on, no matter what it is that our mission in this life is, what does it look like to be in collaboration with nature as we are on our mission? So with that, today's guest, Ian Wogan, he's a Sacred Son. Ian, we met back at Maui Mana, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
I remember when we first met, I saw you climbing those palm trees.
Where it started.
That's where
all the tree climbing started, for sure.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that. Just like as a kid, you were always climbing trees?
We grew up on a dead-end street, and the entire front yard of our property was covered in a massive ficus tree. We had like a Swiss Family Robinson style treehouse up there with a dumbwaiter, and so we'd always be out there up in the crow's nest, swaying in the breeze, climbing. And as I went through college, I really got into sustainable agriculture. And part of the mission when I came back to Miami from California was to get people reconnected with the food system and with where they were getting their food from. So I helped to found a farmer's market, and part of the exercise in the farmer's market was we would go around FIU's campus and climb the coconut trees, climb the coconut palms, and harvest coconuts to give out.
To feed the people.
Feed the people and generate support, generate a connection to that which nourishes us. And it's kind of where my arboriculture career was galvanized.
Yeah, I love that. So that's what we're going to get into today. So with that, our guest today, he's a husband and father of 2. He's an arborist. He's the president and founder of Tree Sources, and he is working in collaboration with nature every day. Please welcome Ian Wogan. What's up, my brother?
Thank you, brother. Appreciate that.
Yeah, man, let's pick up right there. as a kid, you're climbing trees. It brings you into a deep connection, resonance with nature. I think for a lot of us in this generation, we have a more focus on the environment maybe than a previous generation or two before us. Does that feel true for you? Like as a kid and into college, that you had a deeper connection potentially?
Yeah, and I think it also comes with a level of awareness and some of the studies that have gone on around how we have directly impacted our planet and what some of the consequences of those impacts are. And so I think as the generations have passed the torch, there's a greater connectivity and a greater understanding of how we link with the entire planet and what our relationship is. So,
and so are you coming at this as an optimist? It's like we've gone too far. Some people say we can't turn it around. Are you one that believes that we can, that the impact of humans can be reversed in a potentially more reciprocal relationship?
I think that is what I dedicate my life's work to, is doing everything in my power to leave this planet better for the generations to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool, man. So let's drop in. I'm going to invite us to take a deep breath for ourselves. I see you're just coming in from the field to make this podcast. So with that, Ian, on this beautiful day, what have you been up to? What trees have you been working with today?
Today is a special one. We were out in the field working on some mangroves. Mangroves are a coastal tree, largely, and they're one of the most fundamental building blocks of ecosystem function and coastal resilience from a nature-based perspective. Mangroves are vital to our fisheries and the health of our waterways, the protection of our coasts during major wind events and storms. They're an incredible resource, essentially.
Yeah. I spent some time in Puerto Rico and specifically on Vieques Island. And I went to a place called Sun Bay. It's a bioluminescent bay. The entire coastline is filled with mangroves, almost like in an untouched way. And so I got to experience the beauty. Is this an area of impact? Is this something like, have humans decimated mangroves in coastal areas? Or how do we collaborate, right, with the mangroves, just as a starting point?
It's a great question. And I think largely we see our role as stewards from the very, very base level of understanding how important these trees are. And approaching the relationship in that regard. Historically, mangroves, especially in Miami and South Florida, they are located at some of the most prime development sites, right on those bay views, the ocean views. And so a lot of mangroves have been wiped out to make way for, these waterfront properties.
Yeah, condos and high rises.
100%. And so those resources that remain are absolutely vital, are critical. Really, really interesting anecdote. One of the guys that was walking by and seeing us maintain the mangroves was just talking about how the waters had been so crystal clear and that there were dolphin and manatees and huge schools of fish just as early as 15 years ago. So understanding what our impacts are and how we drive design decisions around increasing nature-based solutions in the urban environment is really what our work is about.
Yeah, I like that we're starting here because like the mangrove is a bridge between the land and the water. And recently, Bill Gates, being who he is, said something to the effect of like planting more trees isn't the solution. right? He wants to stop eating meat and produce fake meat in laboratories and things like this to reduce carbon emissions. What do you see out there as a guy who's on the ground in this field? And it's not that you're just planting trees or just landscaping, or I don't want to whittle what you're doing down to any one thing, but can you just broadly let us know what is the higher value of these tree sources? I feel like there are brothers and sisters too out there.
Absolutely. And one of the cool sort of visuals or analogies is when you think of the lifetime of a tree in relation to our lifetimes. In many instances, trees live to be several hundred years old, and sometimes several thousand years old. So if you think of like a little clip, we would be like these little flies just buzzing around trees, super hyperactive, and the trees are just there. They're growing and they're rooted and absorbing and exchanging water and oxygen and carbon dioxide. And it's just this. It's such a beautiful biological system that is so connected to Earth and to the atmosphere and to all the cycles. I find it very challenging to see what we do, in our decision making processes, and in getting swept up into these hyper capitalist modalities of generating revenue and hitting a bottom line, and what that means for some of our forest resources around the world, and for how development happens. And so I think we're just at a very interesting time and place, and where things are happening so fast. We're so caught up in the next thing, the newest thing, that I like to draw the breath and think of that, like slow down and like really kind of bring the metabolism down and get back into the rhythm of trees. It's a very calming condition.
Yeah, and I just like that image of you as a kid too, running into those trees. My son Noah recently asked me to build him a tree house. We have an ash tree in our yard, so I'm trying to think about the most effective way to do that in dad mode, building a tree house. But there's a reality when you say the impact of what humans have done to trees. I immediately go to deforestation, and the fact that deforestation leads to extinction of not only critters and creatures and creepy crawlers, but potentially for humans over a long period of time. And so, and the deforestation largely driven by capitalism is kind of what you're speaking to. But then there's this other area, like I live in California, we have forest fires where we're not in the proper relationship and taking care of down trees or dead trees to prevent these massive forest fires. It's not all about planting seeds. There's another element here where, we also have to take care of the forests so they don't burn down. And I know this is like a big topic, but what are your thoughts on that in the collaboration of both like stopping some of these mass deforestation, but also showing up in stewardship in the ways that we need to?
Yeah, so critical. And I think we kind of like put the capitalist model or capitalist lens on, and we don't nearly value what healthy, intact forests do for us, and the life sustaining resources that they provide to us. And so I think we have quite a ways to go when it comes to that collaboration, that stewardship model, in which we are actively participating in the long-term care and management, which is the stewardship model of these larger resources. I think it's one of the most incredible things that about human beings is that we have this cognitive capacity to understand very complex situations. And it's not to say that we have to apply what we want, but it is using that cognitive capacity to understand what will take our current state of affairs into the future so that the longevity of us as a species is there. Earth will continue on if we drive ourselves to extinction or not. And so going back to the question you asked earlier about kind of the doom and gloom or the rays of hope, I think we have to acknowledge that there, it's a spectrum of experience, but this is really for the longevity of us as a species. And in doing that, we're also through the right principles of stewardship, we're able to provide that for the rest of the planet as well. And so I think we occupy this incredibly potent space of destroyers and creators, and it's all part of the mix. But if we're simply destroying, then that we're just undermining that which sustains us.
And for that shift to happen, or we have to have a change in our values, what we value as humans. Mm-hmm. And it seems like, this is a top-down system. It seems like we're operating on this quarter-to-quarter capitalist model, not only as corporations, but even families and individuals. We're on this check-to-check scarcity model. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, nature's just out there thriving, providing abundance. Like, hey, I'm out here. So you said the principles of stewardship. I would love to know what are some specific principles of stewardship, but maybe I'll ask you from a personal place. When did your values shift towards the earth?
I know that I was very blessed to have a mother who really made it a point that we were outdoors almost all of our free time. And if we weren't outdoors playing, we were outdoors working. We were, doing the chores. And before we could go or do anything on the weekends, we had a laundry list of, mow the grass or trim the trees or X, Y, and Z, support around the house. And so from a very early age, I was blessed with this sense of a work ethic and immersion in the outdoors. I don't think it was really until, it was really in California that the exposure to some of the ways that we could be stewards of our land, stewards of our food system, stewards of that which we decide on a daily basis. It was really in Santa Barbara that I was kind of enamored and awed by this, just a shift in consciousness, or a shift in an understanding of how we are impacting the world. And so I would liken it to my upbringing, and then some very real world experiences, and then figuring out what it is that I wanted to do with my time on the planet, as in a professional space, as a father. And it just lined up with working with my hands, working in nature. And it's evolved to this critical need of incorporating nature-based solutions in our designed environment.
Yeah. And it's also a shift in the time scale with which we are operating in. Because I imagine when you care for trees, plant trees, design green spaces, you're taking into consideration not only the now and next week and next month, but how will future generations interact with these green spaces? Mm-hmm. Is that true?
Entirely. And it's very interesting to kind of like play in the dirt, so to speak, of those that have come before me, and how their perception of designed environments has influenced the world in which we live.
Even in our cities, you walk down the street, it's like one tree surrounded by a ton of concrete. It's like, maybe that's not that was the previous model that, we kind of grew up with in our city streets, but maybe that's not it. Maybe like in city centers, I've seen those photos of like trees on high rises and on rooftops, or larger green spaces dedicated that don't have a drop of concrete. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. And what that confluence looks like is really, it's up to us. We have this incredible artistic ability to weave these imaginative fibers into reality. And so it's really just a limitation of our own
Imagination.
yeah, imagination and drive, really, because it takes a lot to uncouple the one tree surrounded by concrete mentality of like, oh, this is what a streetscape really should look like, or these like hedgerows that are just leftovers from English formal gardens and these like European formal gardens. Like everything has to be prim and proper because they wanted to get away from like this fear of an impending wild, and really I think it's more of exercising our imagination and thinking about it more of like a cultivated wild.
Dude, fear of an impending wild. That is a quote. Wow. And so, yeah, like what's your vision when you're out there and you're creating green spaces? How do you operate? What is the definition of a green space? Can you just like give us some of that arborist context?
Yeah.
That you have that maybe those listening don't really have the words or the concept for.
You hit the nail on the head with that example of a single tree surrounded by concrete. Very rarely in nature does that exist. And so how do we create more like micro forests around the city in which there are islands of plantings? Because trees, when they're able to sink their roots and communicate and share resources underground, that is where you develop a much more resilient sort of forest ecosystem. And so that takes the shape of so many different examples and opportunities. But if you think of, say, a parking lot of a big box store or whatever, a lot of the times you'll just see one tree in a standalone planting. If those trees were all aggregated and the collective footprint of their individual was occupied by a larger planting and grouping, studies have shown that it is far more impactful for supporting wildlife and stormwater management. And so I like to think of it as these like energetic flows, and trees are like giant straws, essentially. They draw tons of water and transpire and cool. And so not only are they capturing carbon and cleaning air, but they're also filtering water and absorbing water. And so in South Florida, where we have pretty significant rain events, how we're designing urban cores to account for bioswales and the movement of water into these plantings where the trees can actually absorb the water, transpire it, and instead of water shooting down asphalt and then into a stormwater system directly into our waterways and polluting quite a bit of it, we have the opportunity to redirect, slow the water down, allow trees to transpire, allow phytoremediation, which is essentially the pulling of organic material out of suspension, out of the water by plants.
Let's keep going in that direction. Because, as you're speaking, what I hear is that we have applied this anthropocentric notion onto nature itself, where we're like, hey, humans should be separated and isolated and have our own spaces. And that's how we best operate. And what I'm hearing is that in order to subdue this fear of an impending wild, we actually have to rewild ourselves. We have to rewild ourselves first so that we can even have a sense of comprehension of how nature truly operates.
I love the work of Sacred Sons because I am able to intentionally expose myself to that which is uncomfortable to me. And so I don't blame generations past for wanting to create these safe spaces where, out in the natural world, they were risking life and limb, right? But that's just not the case. And so how we uncouple from that historical approach to engaging with the natural world and getting into spaces that are more uncomfortable. I love the concept of rewilding, from the inside. I think it's beautifully said.
Yeah. Yeah. When you came into Sacred Sons, that's what I'm saying. The first time I met you, you were already climbing trees. You're already known as a wild man, in our community in that way. What was some of the pieces that you were seeking for yourself, for Ian, as a man, as a new father? When you came into Maui Mana, I know a little bit about your backstory, but what were some of those pieces inside of you that you were looking to shine light on?
I grew up with three amazing sisters and my mom as my primary caretaker. So I was always surrounded by this beautiful feminine energy, and connecting to brothers or connecting to other men was uncomfortable in many ways. I played sports a lot, so that allowed some engagement, but not at the depth that you guys bring forth in this world. It's really having a space and having those creative containers that hold vulnerability and love and sadness and fear and just the uncomfortability, and to be seen by other men. It's not so much that's what I was going into to experience, but that's what has emerged for me in getting to drop in with Sacred Sons.
Yeah, you remember that wrestling match you had with Tony Rigatoni? Flying over the top rope, it felt like you guys are like rolling out on the cliffs of Maui.
So good. Oh, so good. That's special,
That's one way to rewild, like to come into contact with other humans, to get to the roots of what it means to, like, for us to stand on common ground and to get our root systems connected and our values connected, so that we can go back out into the world with our gifts and apply them to whatever we're creating in this world. I have to imagine, for anyone who has children, you want to leave this place better than you found it. That's kind of a standard we could all uphold. Like, can we actually leave this earth better than we found it? Can we create a better ecosystem for human beings to thrive in than where we came in? And so for men to come together specifically, and like I'm saying, connect those root systems, get back into that childlike play, get into that essence, and then make real commitments for our lives. It's invaluable, because largely men are making decisions in this world that do impact the planet. Mm-hmm. And it's not that we're going to be perfect, or it's not that we're coming to be saviors, but it's like, I don't know, what is it for you? Do you have two daughters, or do you have a son?
Two daughters.
Yeah, so you were raised with women, and now you're back in it. You're back in it, except now you're the dad with your beautiful wife, Virginia, and then you have two daughters. What's that like?
Oh, man. So special, so special. I feel like I can't be more fortunate, to have two healthy girls. They're both redheads, super fiery. And Virginia, my wife and partner has been such a stronghold for my personal growth and development. I'm just so grateful for the strong women in my life, and to get to be the male figure, the primary male figure for my daughters, and to have access and to participate in the work that we're doing with Sacred Sons is just, it's really, I wouldn't want it any other way, I'm so grateful.
Yeah, it's profound work. And the question and sometimes the song that we sing is, who do we do it for?
Mm.
And so we come together as men for the daughters, for the partners, for the mothers. Because as men, it's also like we have to train for these relationships. I felt like in my life, like no one trained us for how to best relate, not only with the feminine, but with ourselves, with others. And then ultimately, to bring it back to nature, like I feel like when we learn relational tools, we then begin to apply them to all of our relations. Right?
Yeah, totally.
And that's a big part of the work. That's what it means when we get into Sweat Lodge, when we're reconnecting with the elements, we're sitting on the dirt, we're with the grandfather stones, we're pouring the water over, and of course the fire that brings life. I mean, that's a part of that rewilding.
Entirely. And yeah, it's a great analogy for, to think that it wasn't necessarily available or part of our upbringing, but that's the work that you've brought into this world, that connection to self, that relationship with others, and how we approach kind of that radical responsibility of our actions and
Yes.
and ownership of our shit.
Owning our shit big time.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's beautiful. And I think very similarly, my dedication and my life's energy is in that relationship with the natural world, is figuring out how we can bring that relationship to just a far more balanced dynamic,
Perfect. So here I am. I got a backyard. I got a ton of succulents. I'm in San Diego, so we got a little water resource issue over here. We don't get the tropical rainstorms that you get in Florida.
Yeah.
But like like I'm saying, how can an individual become connected? Like, what can I be doing to be in relationship with my immediate surroundings in my environment?
Beautiful question. There's this incredible concept of a backyard national park, in which by looking at the plant palette that was historically a part of wherever you live, San Diego or Miami or New York or Asia, or typically those plants have evolved with migratory birds and beneficial pollinators and all of the other flora and fauna. And a lot of times what we do in kind of creating these safe spaces, or like these safe homes, is we just eliminate everything and bring in some exotic species or something that is aesthetically pleasing. And when we reframe that and think of the opportunity to provide a little stopover for a migratory bird that might be flying, from Canada down to Mexico and into South America, and your yard has the food source that blooms in the springtime as the bird is passing through, and it has that little moment to stop for food and to carry on in its flight. And so we have this incredible opportunity to bring back the native ecological function that has largely existed for eons and millennia. Interestingly, here in South Florida, we had the last glaciation around 5,000 years ago, and that completely changed the kind of plant palette and the dynamics of things. But for 5,000 years, these plants have evolved with animals, and there's countless examples of one particular plant species that is the only host for a rare endangered butterfly or a bird or a pollinator. And so that's what we can do, is just utilize a a historically relevant plant palette, while considering kind of the aesthetic function and values that we like to bring to our spaces, and that so appease our sense of connection. But just using native plant species in our own backyards is like, it's huge. It's incredibly important, super valuable.
Dude, this idea of a national forest in your backyard, is that what you said? Backyard national park, dude, that's epic.
Yeah.
Backyard national park. I love that because so many of the homes around where I live, they're like zero scaped. Like, here, put a bunch of rocks down so nothing grows. And just like almost like in a complete antithesis, instead of like getting to know your environmental history of the land that you occupy, that you're blessed to be on, like get a little bit of knowledge and just put those native species down. That's dope. And then the pollinators, because there's also an issue in Southern California with our bees, and bee populations are down. And so having some of those plants that the bees come around and pollinate naturally, those little baby steps, I'm always about baby steps. That's so dope, because that's actually something anyone can do. Put that hummingbird feeder out and plant those flowers that the pollinators come for. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah. Super simple, and it doesn't, you don't have to be an activist, and you don't have to be, it's a very straightforward thing that anybody can do.
Yeah. And then the other side of that, yeah, because you're right, you don't have to be an activist, but it changes the perspective of coming from fear, like, oh my God, global warming's coming to kill us all, to an act of love, for that one bee, or that one family of bees, or for that group of butterflies. And we do have that. We have these monarchs that come from Canada to Mexico, and they go back every year. We see them passing through. And so to be a part of the system once again, I think is what's important there. Like, to get in the game.
Yeah, totally. And it's unearthing what that game is, because we operate and we're brought up in these constructs of what the quote unquote real world really is. And so it's breaking those molds, and it's unearthing, and it's reconnecting with that which sustains us.
Yeah, that's really cool. One of my favorite trees are the redwoods. And I've recently heard, have you been in the redwoods in Northern California, Oregon coast? Incredible, like 100, 200 foot trees. These are the trees that can potentially live to be thousands of years old. And I've also recently heard that the redwoods and the sequoias, like, there's evidence that they may have actually been planted by previous civilizations, like that it's no accident.
Wow.
Like people may have intentionally planted. I've even heard similar things about the Amazon rainforest, that there's evidence of civilizations for thousands of years, that is not just wild, but there's a permaculture aspect where things have intentionally been placed.
Yeah.
And so that's the stewardship. It's so embedded that we couldn't even recognize it thousands of years later. Like, that's real next level stewardship. But let me throw it back to you. What's your favorite tree?
Shoot. I'm not much of a man of favorites, but I love
guy.
I love mangroves, just for that bridge essence that they occupy between land and water.
Yeah.
For what they support in terms of ecosystem and ecological life in our waters. There's a family of trees, or a genus of trees called ficus. Yeah, if you think of the temples in Southeast Asia, where the roots are completely overgrowing, and kind of consuming the temples, those are ficus trees. They're the banyan tree is one of the largest footprint trees on the planet. There's one in India that's like something silly, like 3.5 hectares or something. It's enormous. And we have 3 native ficus to South Florida, and it is one of the most vital food sources for migratory birds. And it's also probably one of the coolest treehouse trees that you could think of, because they sprawl and they basically like create new trunks from their aerial prop roots as they drop down. and that's kind of like this walking mechanism that they grow and enlarge from. So ficus are absolutely amazing.
Are all banyans ficus? Is that what you're saying? Is that
Banyans are within the genus Ficus. So a banyan is Ficus bengalensis. There are, I think there's probably a couple hundred species, a couple hundred species of ficus within that genus. Pretty special. Oaks are just like kind of like the classic durable, and it's like when we get to climb trees basically almost on a daily basis and prune trees. And what we do as arborists in South Florida is essentially we focus on the predominant architecture of the trees to improve the storm resilience of these trees in major wind events. And so we're essentially like creating these massive bonsai type. We're kind of like barbers in a way, but we're training the trees to withstand, these 100-mile-an-hour winds that come through, on a fairly regular basis. And so getting to climb and interact with the tree, is just like, it's super special. It's hard to describe. Smelling the sawdust and yeah.
Like your arborist barbers. The banyan, man, that famous banyan tree in Maui recently burned down. Of all of the things that was a focal point of like such a natural disaster and such a tragedy, like so many people remembered that banyan tree. People who had visited Maui, people who had like love for an entire island and people. Mm-hmm. Like to have a collective of people acknowledge and love a single tree or a single tree system, like that's a profound thing. I think that's also a piece of us returning to what we value, right? And it's a symbol. It's a symbol of like, oh man, like we collectively can have so much love for this one tree out on this tiny island in the middle of the Pacific.
I love that, and I think of some of these like ancient trees as like wayfinding beings, is an entity to visit and just be enamored by. And if you go and hug a tree, it's like, obviously tree hugger has like a whole connotation, but like if you really put your heart up against a tree and like allow it to absorb your entire being, it's one of the most comforting things you could possibly do.
Yeah, man. I mean, there's a big movement of grounding happening. Like there's like even companies that are teaching people how to ground. It's like, fucking take your shoes off and go walk on the earth, right? It's not rocket science, but there is a part of it that is science. And what you're saying is like, that's the ultimate grounding, like to hug a tree, to actually feel your pulse in connection with the bark of the tree and with your bare feet on the roots or on the ground. Like that's a real life experience.
Totally. And I, speaking for myself, I can learn things in historical context, and sometimes along the way those things get forgotten. And so that idea getting multiplied over generations, like we lose a lot of deep knowledge, a lot of like inherent intelligence that doesn't get translated through the generations. And so just, whoever needs to go hug a tree, like do it for yourself.
And that's another way to alleviate the fear of the impending wild. Like, don't be afraid of those trees. And more so than being afraid of the impending wild, don't be afraid of being a hippie. Don't be afraid of being a tree hugger just because somebody told you that that's lame or that means something about you.
Right.
Like what is that? What is that part of us that's like, that subconsciously wants to separate us from nature versus to get us more immersed in it? A Sacred Sons brother recently said, like, he was like, yeah, people have this idea about me that I'm into nature. And he's like, I'm not. I'm a part of nature. And I'm just acknowledging it. You feel part of nature?
Absolutely. And there are also kind of those like mental tendrils of of like societal constructs that I can relate to being separate from nature. It can be a real sentiment of separation. And it's the work to get back into connection for me, you know. As much as I'm like in it all the time, it's still very real that there's some measure of disconnect, you know, that we're somehow apart in some ways, apart from. Interesting though.
Well, this has been a fun conversation. It's even on a thought level, it's fun to think about trees and to acknowledge them. And you know, you have Tree Sources. You're a president and founder of. Yeah, I love to see you putting your passion into action, into a business, and into a thriving culture, really, that you're creating in Miami and beyond. And so with that, is there any piece that you want to let us know about Tree Sources?
The primary function of Tree Sources is to reintegrate ecological function in our built and designed environments. And we do that from an inherent and scientific knowledge of the values of ecosystem function. So we like to touch and participate in basically the life cycles of any quote unquote green infrastructure projects, from initial observation and data collection. So we'll do a canopy analysis for a municipality here in Miami, or we'll do an environmental assessment of a site, and that baseline observation period and discovery period enables us to understand how we might recommend doing things better and incorporating more trees, incorporating bioswales, including the movement of stormwater, or designing for fires. And then we take those recommendations and implement them. So if there's a large project in which a developer wants to come in and remove a bunch of trees, our impact analysis and our initial assessment will inform, hey, maybe these trees can be relocated to a public park or a microforest. You know, there's a great example in a neighborhood called Overtown here, where we're working directly with a developer who wants to build, and there are these 3 massive oak trees. And immediately adjacent is a historic building that has been renovated and doesn't have very many trees on site. And so we inform the process by navigating with the city, navigating with the clients, and relocating those trees to a place that they will be preserved and last for the future generations. And then we bring in an ongoing stewardship model. So the constant care and revisiting sites to observe how our design and the implementation of that design has grown or needs to be cared for over its lifetime. So that's kind of the nutshell. We touch all points of a green infrastructure project through an observation in which we are not informing before observing. We are not immediately jumping to the gun. We're taking in the essence of what is on a site or how it might be impacted, and the interjection or the recommendations are through how we can improve those ecological conditions for the long term.
Yeah, and if you're not observing from the capitalist mindset, which is like, we got to clear this to break ground for this new project, what is the lens through which you are observing? Sounds like you're coming from the heart, but I don't want to say
it. Absolutely. I mean, it's direct from the heart, and that doesn't always translate to a successful business venture. And so there are these very real challenges of having to pioneer these methodologies and these systems until there's more adoption, until there's the proof of concept that people can point their finger to and say, oh, instead of chopping all these trees down, let's relocate them to a project that's going to need trees anyway, or if the trees have to be removed, can that wood waste be diverted from the landfills so that we're not stacking up all this super beautiful hardwoods from Miami, and we can reinvest it into the local economy. And so there are these very real pain points of having to pioneer and demonstrate what this really looks like in action, in reality. And we have to speak the language of the bottom line. We have to demonstrate the economic viability of salvaging a tree, because it's the only way that it will be adopted by those that are practicing within that realm. And so, it's a dance, it's an art in many ways.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, it's really about just getting in the game, getting in the awareness, being able to bring it back to our local setting environment, and just have a baseline understanding of what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a great place for each of us to land, to arrive and to become curious once again, because I think what the other thing that deforestation does to us is it cuts away our curiosity.
Mm.
It's we're more interested in fucking IKEA furniture than
straight lines,
than the trees that it comes from. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, to become curious once again, I think that's a great place to land. So with that, Ian, is there any message, prayer, or final words that you would like to leave with the brothers and sisters who are listening?
Let's keep growing together,
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Perfect. Let's keep growing. Let's keep growing, fam. Yeah, man. For your kids, for my kids, for all our kids, for the kid in us that wants to climb the tree and have the tree house. I mean, that's a part of what it is too.
For sure.
Beautiful. With that, Ian Wogan, Tree Sources. Check him out on IG. Check out Tree Sources.
Yeah, we got a great video that you can check out, and we'll post it in the show notes. A great introduction to what the work is all about, and I think more than anything, it's the message here is find that which inspires you and that which you love to do. And I think you'll see through the video that I've found it, and that it's still a constant exploration,
With that, Ian Wogan, Tree Sources, Adam Jackson, Sacred Sons. We're out, family. Peace.
Peace.